Guys Power Grid, and I am your host, Cecil Lammy from Footballguys.com. With me, the Power Grid is in place with the big man, John Lee, checking in. John, we got real football tonight.
I cannot wait. We've been waiting 9 months for this, and we have a great game to be watching tonight. It's not necessarily a great fantasy game, but I'll take football in any way I can get it.
Yeah, real live football, and Jeff Pasquino is fired up. JP, how you doing, man?
Hey, I can't wait. I can't believe the season is upon us already, but I'm looking forward to it big time.
Now, Devin, you're looking forward to Ezekiel Elliott not playing tonight in the Thursday night game, but pretty soon for Dallas Cowboys. And I'm thinking 100 yards for Ezekiel Elliott. I don't know. You got the Elliott Cowboys jersey yet or no? Or when they leave Ohio State, then you're done with them?
I haven't bought it yet. I have the Ohio State jersey, but I think 100 yards, total yards might happen. I think he's going to start off a little bit slow this year.
Okay, well, we're going to jump into that. And Austin Lee, one of my favorite guys, and talking DFS with this guy last year, very fun. Austin, how you doing, man?
I'm just glad to be back on a show with you guys, enjoying football season, and I've been poring over my lineups and can't wait to learn some more things from you guys that I can infuse into my lineups for this week.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I got to pick y'all's brain and then put them in my own DFS lineups. We're going to be talking about lots of things, going through position by position. We're going to talk about stacks. We will have some injury news as well, and, of course, start with Vegas odds. After we get to some NFL news and notes, Sam Bradford traded, Minnesota desperate. Pasquino, I'll let you take this one because Bradford was with the Eagles. Now they're going to go with Carson Wentz. Fantasy reaction. This mean more Adrian Peterson for Minnesota and for Philadelphia. What do they do with Wentz leading the way?
I kind of reminded of the whole scene of the Titanic movie where they kind of shuffle checks on the deck chairs. Right, we're going down, doesn't really matter, but they're doing it anyway. I think that Minnesota, this is a desperation move by Minnesota trying to get a quarterback fit. This is their window. They're trying to win a championship. I get it, but they spent a lot to get Bradford. From a fantasy perspective, I don't see much difference between Bradford and Sean Hill. Maybe they feel better about it. They have two Sean Hills now, I guess. But neither of these quarterbacks, Wentz or Bradford, was expected to do much this year. I think they're QB2s at most in fantasy perspective. For DFS, even in the best matchups, I really wouldn't trust them. I tend to go away from cheap quarterbacks unless they're really, really good matchups and really experienced.
Well, Devin, I'm going to toss it to you, and to build on Ezekiel Elliott conversation, we all know Tony Romo done for a while. Here comes Dak Prescott. Is part of your hesitation to put Elliott over 100, is that have to do with the young quarterback? Because preseason football much different than regular season football.
Yeah, everybody loves Dak this week as somebody who's watched him over the last 2 or 3 years at Mississippi State. I just think his transition is going to take a little bit longer than people think it will. He had a fumbling problem in college, and I just don't see the offense moving the ball that much. So I think they're really going to focus on stopping Elliott more than they otherwise would have with Romo.
Well, and I'll toss it back to you, Devin, because you know college football like no other, and you remember Dak Prescott didn't have a great offensive line. One thing that I saw from him down at the Senior Bowl is when you protect him, as the Cowboys can and will, with those mountains that they call an offensive line, he's always reminded me of a version of Donovan McNabb, maybe not a straight comparison. Would you agree with that? Because he was running for his life, especially last year at Mississippi State. I
think his upside is definitely Donovan McNabb. I think, is he able to quickly transition? There's a reason he was a 4th or 5th round pick. I think his upside is there. I just think he's going to take a little bit of time to develop to the, like you said, in preseason, it's more of a vanilla defense versus facing exotic blitzes and things like that.
Yeah, we're going to see what goes down with Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys this week. Now, John Lee, what's going on in Baltimore? Justin Forsett was not really cut. He was cut, but it's basically a paperwork move, right? Shuffling a procedural move. The other players were going to be subject to waivers. Justin Forsett was not. Now he's back. Everyone's waiting for Kenneth Dixon, who's got an MCL injury, going to miss about a month. So how much trust do you have not only in Forsett but any of those Baltimore running backs right now?
Yeah, I don't think you can have much trust at all at the moment, Cease. I think you nailed it. You said it in the middle of your intro there that everybody's waiting on Kenneth Dixon. He looks to be the running back that Baltimore is most interested in developing over the long haul. At the moment, I think what we're going to see is a split between Forsett and West in early downs, and then we'll see Buck Allen come in and passing down situations. But I don't think that the coaching staff there is in love with any one of these running backs at this point, and I think they're just biding time until Dixon returns in a month.
Yeah, we'll see how that shakes out. Austin, as we wrap up the NFL news portion of the program, I have to ask you about something that's very curious, and it's down in New Orleans with tight end Coby Fleener. Now, what's great about this time of year, all of our preseason narratives, because we examine this game, we obsess over this game more than most, we're going to examine all those preseason narratives, and one of those, at least for me, Austin, was, hey, on paper, I love Coby Fleener with the Saints. Like, it just seems like he'll be everything that Jimmy Graham used to be and is not ever going to be with Seattle, like and Drew Brees in the Dome, and it just felt really good. And then not even reading between the lines, it is the actual just reading, whether it's Sean Payton or Drew Brees, even Coby Fleener himself talking about the struggles in learning that playbook. Like, on-paper ideas will come to fruition tonight and Sunday and Monday night with the doubleheader. When we're talking week 2, are we saying, hey, Coby Fleener, they limited the playbook, it was smaller for him, or will we be talking, wow, Coby Fleener didn't do a lot?
I think we're going to be disappointed with Coby Fleener's performance, and I think he's going to be a popular DFS pick because of his price this week, but he's not a guy that I'm rostering. The news out of New Orleans about him struggling with the playbook and running the wrong routes and just not being where he's supposed to be, I think he's a guy who's going to have a great second half of the season in this offense, and he's not a guy I'm investing in DFS this week.
Well, let's get to the injury news. Again, the first episode ever of the Football Guys Power Grid as we talk DFS. And let's talk a little Jamal Charles. I'm just going to go right down the line. John, let's go ahead and start with you. With Jamal Charles, there's plenty of people who think Charles may be down more than a month. We know that Spencer Ware is good, top 10 fantasy running back. How much faith do you have that Ware can run with the job? You know, when Charles comes back, what are we looking at then? Is it a three-headed committee? Maybe not getting ahead of ourselves, but for this week, Spencer Ware, how much faith do you have that he can get it done at home against San Diego?
I think he has a lot of potential this weekend and moving forward. I don't have a whole lot of confidence that Jamal Charles is ever going to come back in the same capacity that he had over the past few years. This is a really tough knee injury that he suffered, and we see that he's just now, I think Tuesday he was activated to practice. Yesterday he was wearing the do not tackle jersey, and today I haven't heard anything, but my speculation on the weekend is that if he does suit up, we'll see very, very limited action from Jamal Charles. And we know that Spencer Ware has been working in the offseason trying to improve the things that he was weakest upon, and one of those is catching the ball out of the backfield. When he was in the game in preseason, I believe he had back-to-back games with 4 receptions, everything thrown his way. He caught. He's a big bruising back. We'll see him at the goal line. I really love his fantasy prospects this season. I think that this is probably just the timing of everything works out very well for him. And this weekend, where DFS is concerned, I will have a lot, and probably more of a percentage of my players in Spencer Ware than any other player.
That's a message for all DFS players out there. I know I'm writing down my notes. Jeff Pasquino, when we look at what's going on, let's talk about Green Bay's situation and Jordy Nelson. Now, I believe that Packers fans and fantasy owners should be saying, hallelujah, Mike McCarthy's calling plays again. Well, Jordy Nelson healthy, but maybe a snap count? What's your take? How do you approach this week with Nelson, with the other players in that passing game, including Randall Cobb?
Well, with the elite players, snap counts don't always scare me. I mean, we've seen Gronkowski on snap counts, and he winds up with 2 touchdowns in the first quarter. So for an elite player like Jordy Nelson to be back with Aaron Rodgers is going to get him in the mix right away. And I actually like this game. I like the Green Bay-Jacksonville game to be very high scoring. So I think Nelson gets 100 yards, gets his feet wet very nicely, and finds the end zone in week 1. I don't have any reservations at all about using him this week.
Now, Devin, I got to pick your brain about another guy that stood out in college football years ago at Texas A&M as a freshman. Christine Michael had about 900 yards rushing in 4 games. Then he was hurt. Then he got in the doghouse with Mike Sherman back then, Devin, and then he just kind of never did much of anything. Saw him at the Shrine game. It looked like he had the juice back in his legs. Then we've seen him bounce around the league. Then he bounces from Seattle all across the league. Then he finds himself back in Seattle and back in the driver's seat. This Seattle running back situation with Thomas Rawls listed as number 2 and Christine Michael listed as the number 1 back. How are you approaching this from a DFS angle, and can we finally trust Christine Michael, who I think, from a pure natural talent standpoint, in terms of natural talent for running backs, he's a top 10 player. But does that translate to production, and how much does Rawls cut in?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is a guy who would be a first-round talent if he stayed out of trouble in the doghouse in college. He still went in the second round, even though he wasn't that productive outside of those 4 games that you mentioned. Bounced around a little bit. Thomas Rawls is another guy who's had issues, who was undrafted. The Seahawks don't have a lot invested in him. I think if Michael comes out and takes the job, he will keep the job throughout the season. So I think I'm using him more this week than probably I should be, because I think Rawls still isn't 100% healthy. And I think Michael gets a majority of the carries.
That's an interesting situation to watch, including what we have to take note of with what's going on in Miami. Now, I've made no bones about it this entire offseason, Austin. I love Adam Gase. I love his offense. I love the fact that Jarvis Landry is going to be playing the Demaryius Thomas role. Devontae Parker was always interesting to me, watching him at Louisville with Teddy Bridgewater, the way he could get open on those longer routes. Now, hamstring injury, getting called out by Adam Gase, and just getting outperformed. Like Kenny Stills, the guy behind him, is shining. So when we're looking at sneaky DFS plays, and nobody should be playing Parker if he plays with this hamstring, but what about Stills? What about Landry? And what about this game against Seattle in Seattle?
Yeah, this is going to be a brutal game for the Miami offense. But if you want to go contrarian on a GPP play, I think Landry is priced right at both FanDuel and DraftKings this week. And Kenny Stills should be the beneficiary of Devontae Parker being out. He just can't seem to stay healthy. He's been injured like all preseason, and if he can't get his act together, he's really not going to climb this depth chart. So I think we'll see Stills kind of hold down that second receiver spot for the first half of the year.
Let's move to the Vegas odds, and we'll start again with John about Vegas. What are the Vegas odds telling you for this week, and how to pair that for DFS plays and information?
Yeah, so this week is always interesting. Week 1's always interesting because I think Vegas knows about as much as we do as football guys. They're guessing as much as we are. I think they have a few things right. That is, Seattle was a big favorite at home. They're giving up over 10 points to that same aforementioned Miami Dolphins offense with the implied team total of approaching 4 touchdowns. Right behind them is Indianapolis playing at home against the Lions. They're 3.5-point favorites, and they're slated to score about 4 touchdowns themselves. In terms of other big favorites that we might be looking to target running backs from those teams, Arizona is playing New England at home, so you could be looking at a guy like David Johnson. He's going to cost you, but we know he's going to be in there extensively against a New England team that I think probably comes out a little uninspired in this game. Outside of that, you've got Houston, also down in the southwestern area of the country. They're going up against Chicago, a team that I think is going to be absolutely dreadful this year, and they're giving up 6 points as well. So as far as running backs, you should be looking at teams like Seattle. You should be looking at Arizona and Houston, as well as Kansas City. Spencer Ware going back to that as well. Teams you want to stay away from: Miami, Cleveland, San Diego. We're looking at the same types of teams here. And, rather than go through the entire list, I'll just refer our folks back to the Vegas value chart that I print off every Tuesday. It lists all the passing and running plays based on the Vegas odds, and it's right there in our DFS section of the subscriber site.
Yeah, make sure to check it out at footballguys.com. JP, any Vegas tips, news you like to get to?
I think there's one or two games that are being overlooked there on this list. The first one that I see is the Oakland-New Orleans game. I think that I expect a lot of passing in this game. I like Crabtree. I like Cooper. I like Carr for Oakland. I also like Drew Brees throwing a lot. So I don't see much ground game happening in that game. I think that's one of the games I have circled as a good place to go for tournament plays and stacks. I also like Jacksonville against Green Bay. I think that Blake Bortles was a home run hitter last year, and I think there's a potential again this year. And lastly, Atlanta and Tampa Bay could get up some points too. I think there's some potential there for Matt Ryan, Julio Jones stack going on this week. Week 1.
Yeah, it's live, baby. It's live. I can edit that out on the podcast version, Jeff. The Julio. We'll just call him Jules. We call him Devin, and he knows Vegas. What's Vegas telling you this week, man?
Yeah, I love the Pittsburgh-Washington game. The over-under is one of the highest on the board, and Matt Jones is banged up for Washington, so Kirk Cousins is going to make it in quite a few of my lineups. They're going to have to throw quite a bit at home, but paced with Pittsburgh. But that's the game that stands out to me. I know it's Monday night, so it might not be available everywhere, but we've seen some big Monday night games in the past from quarterbacks, and that's the one that stands out to me the most.
And Austin, you're up with Vegas. What's it telling you this week for DFS?
Well, I just want to say, don't worry about the Julio Jones thing. I called CJ Procise, CJ Primrose on the podcast last night. He's a beautiful flower to me.
You win.
Yeah, but week 1.
Yeah.
On the Vegas stuff, I think that we got to keep an eye on this Dallas Giants game a little bit. It's pretty close to evenly matched. This thing could go in the toilet or it could completely blow up. I think you might be able to find some interesting GPP plays, mining games that are kind of seem ugly on paper but could get out of hand. I
got one more for you to throw in last minute.
Okay, let's do it.
I think the LA San Francisco game to close out, speaking of Monday night, closing out the week, the Rams could easily be running all day in the second half. I mean, a lot of people are going to be looking at the cheap running backs that we talked about, but Todd Gurley is going to be putting up monster numbers against San Francisco, and the LA defense is going to look good too. So that is going to be an under-owned stack. It's going to be a nice contrarian play in DFS. I like that one a lot.
We'll keep that one in mind as well for Monday night as we have that doubleheader. Super late game, but here's what's going to happen is I'm going to fall asleep watching it, wake up, see Todd Gurley make a big run, fall back asleep, wake up a little bit later, see Todd Gurley make a big run, fall back to sleep. So, yes, rinse, repeat, lots of Todd Gurley. Now we move to our positional breakdowns where we'll go through each fella here on our power grid and talk about their favorite quarterbacks of the week. And are you spending up on quarterback is kind of the general theme for this week's show. John, you're up first, and you can go top tier, mid-tier, bottom tier QBs. Just give us some names that you like.
Yeah, so I think the thing that everybody's going to be talking about this week is whether or not we should be just setting it and forgetting it with Dak Prescott. He's pretty much the site minimum across the industry, and he's playing behind an offensive line that we've already spoken about in this show, and has looked sensational in the preseason. At the end of the day, I think that Dak Prescott is safe for cash games because I think that he has a decent floor behind that offensive line. I do think that the Cowboys will go run heavy, but I suspect that he'll pick up 150, 200 yards plus a touchdown or two, and he's got the ability to run one in depending on what happens. So Prescott's a guy, I think in your cash games, he's somebody that I want. Simply because he's so cheap and the opportunity cost, meaning that he affords me the ability to do so much elsewhere, is so low. So Dak Prescott for my cash games. I think for GPPs, however, the thing you want to do is probably to avoid names like Dak Prescott and Carson Wentz because I think they'll be so highly owned. So from a game strategy perspective, what I want to be doing is probably spending up at quarterback to differentiate my rosters. And there's a couple guys I like, and I'll continue to plug our stuff at Footballguys. Definitely check out my article, Tips and Picks. It'll be out tomorrow night on the site. But I'll give you a flavor of somebody I love tomorrow. and that's Matthew Stafford going against the Colts. Their entire defense is decimated right now. I think they have 4, maybe 5 starters who look like they will not be playing, including their perennial all-pro cornerback Vontae Davis. Meanwhile, the Lions have just stocked up on receivers in the offseason. We've got Golden Tate returning. You have Marvin Jones, Anquan Bolden, sure hands. I think this could be a great spot for them in a shootout. They're going from dome to dome. They're playing away. Vegas has them as a slight underdog. I could really see this game being a shootout. You can stack it every which way. I love Stafford tomorrow night, Sunday, and I think that it would not be surprising to see him finish with 3 to 4 touchdowns.
Pasquino, you're up with some of your favorite quarterbacks in Week 1.
I love John, but I'm going to go a little bit contrarian to what he said. I've been burned so many times by going cheap at quarterback in the past. There's one thing I like to remember is that no position can go as negative as any other position as quarterback. With interceptions, fumbles, quarterback can burn you. And there's so much value this week in cash games for running back, I'm going to pay up for a Stafford or a Luck or a Wilson or a Rodgers, and that's where I'm going to go this week. I think Stafford is probably the better play. And from tournament standpoints, I'm looking to that Derek Carr, Blake Bortles. The other thing about playing these higher end quarterbacks, the bigger prices, is that they're going to be lower owned than they're going to be in other weeks because people are going to be on Dak Prescott and have a lot of ownership there. So that's why I'm leaning towards going towards a more proven quarterback in a higher point game than a cheaper quarterback this week. And probably most weeks, again, I try to stay away from getting burnt at quarterback.
Now, Devin, you're the tiebreaker. We got Jeff and John kind of going back and forth. Where do you weigh on quarterbacks this week?
I got to side with Jeff here. I mentioned Dak Prescott's fumbling issues in college. And yeah, I hear you, man. I too have been burned many, many times by just taking the plug-and-play cheap guy on the bottom of the board. Johnny Manziel, I started way too many times.
Browns fan.
But he was also, I think, 40% owned in a live final, so other people have been on him as well. There's a tendency to just say, hey, a quarterback is going to guarantee me 150 yards and possibly a touchdown. That's not always the case. I mean, Prescott could turn the ball over 3, 4, 5 times. I'm looking at guys at the higher end. I'm looking at Luck. I'm looking at Drew Brees. I'm looking at Ben Roethlisberger. Kirk Cousins, as I mentioned before, is going to be my GPP guy. I think it's going to be a shootout of a game. So I have to lean with Jeff on this one.
All right. Well, Austin, you're up, and you may make it a tie again.
Yeah, I'm more with John in the camp of using Dak in cash games. But the thing is, for me, is when I play cash games, I'm not the kind of guy who goes all in on one quarterback in all my cash games. I generally will have a set of 3 different quarterbacks that I like for my cash game lineups each week, and Dak Prescott will be one of those guys, so I'll only have a third exposure to him. And then with my other guys, I'll go for some of the guys you pay up for, like Drew Brees, Russell Wilson. Those are a couple of guys I'm generally paying up for in cash games this week.
So if we talk about a game strategy move here, Cease, sorry to interject there.
Yeah, let's do that.
From a game strategy perspective, I think, everything I've been reading this week, social media, various sites, everything I've been reading says that Dak Prescott's going to be by far the number 1 ranked cash game quarterback. If he's 40% owned, and maybe that's a little bit high, but it's not too high. I'll say 30% owned. He's going to be 30% owned in cash games. If you don't have him and he scores 20 points, you can write off your cash game rosters because you're likely not making that up elsewhere.
But if he scores 2, you can every contest.
But you're with 30% of the people. So I would rather be with the masses if he fails than against the masses if he succeeds.
That's a very fair point about the ownership percentage. If it's going to be that high and everybody's going to be in that boat, on a cash game basis, yes, but on a tournament basis, I'm completely off of Dak Prescott. No way.
I think we all agree on that. Yes.
Yeah.
I will say this. I will lose every contest if Dak Prescott goes off.
Good point.
I'm okay with that.
That is Devin Knotts, ladies and gentlemen. Now we're going to do snake order. So, Austin, you are up first in talking about some of your favorite running backs this week.
I think the 3 highest owned running backs this week are going to be Spencer Ware, D'Angelo Williams, and Kristen Michael. I think that even if we see Rawls playing this week, it's going to be as a secondary role. So I'll be using those three guys pretty heavily in my cash games. But then over in tournaments, I'm going to try to differentiate a little bit. Spencer Ware is the one where I'll probably have him in both. But I'm going to mix it up a little bit and spend a little bit up on guys like Mark Ingram. I'm a big fan of Mark Ingram, catching more passes last season. I think that's going to continue this season. I think that you also got to invest in a guy like Lamar Miller. I think is in a good situation this week to pay up for, to kind of maybe pivot off of someone like D'Angelo Williams or pay up instead of going cheapo with Kristen Michael.
Okay, Devin, you're up with running backs. What do you got?
I agree with a lot of what Austin had said. The other guy that I like a lot this week is Ryan Matthews. He's one of those guys that people hate because they burned him in season-long leagues, but in DFS, you only have to hope he stays healthy for 4 quarters. Cleveland's defense is absolutely awful. They've lost 3 starters this year, so he's the guy that I will be targeting almost in 100% of my lineups this week for both cash and GPP, along with Spencer Wares and D'Angelo Williams. And Christine Michael, I'm only going to have in GPP. I'm still worried about. He has the talent, just how that workload split is going to shake out.
Devin, super quick, what about the way defenses will play Wentz and stacking the line to stuff the run for Mr. Matthews?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to matter for Cleveland's defensive line. I mean, they were they were second worst in rushing yards allowed last year, and they lost Paul Kruger, they lost Deshaun Gibson, they lost Barkevius Mingos. They've lost a lot of relative talent. I don't know if it's great talent, but they've lost talent on the defensive side of the ball, and they really haven't replaced it. So Wentz, I think, will be adequate enough to at least keep them somewhat honest, and I think Kenyon Barner isn't going to scare me as far as taking touches away from Ryan Matthews.
What you have to do when you talk about Cleveland is go the old Chris Farley with the air quotes, and they say they have talent in Cleveland on their football team. Pasquino, you're up, man. Which running backs you like?
I liked a lot of the cheaper names that we mentioned. I do like the Lamar Miller pivot off of D'Angelo Williams. We mentioned Todd Gurley earlier. I think going high end at running back is going to be very contrarian this week. So if you get a Gurley or even an Adrian Peterson, who no one is talking about this week, he's going to be very low owned. But there are a couple of names that are cheaper that I like, especially on full PPR sites. Gio Bernard. I think Gio Bernard's very cheap this week across the industry, and I think so is James White. Both those guys are going to catch a lot of passes out of the backfield. And I also think Duke Johnson's going to be used a lot against Philadelphia. Philadelphia's front 7 is what everybody's talking about. But if they get Duke Johnson who out in the perimeter where they like to get him the ball and they've worked him as a receiver, I think it's a very good value play you can put into a flex spot or a second running back.
Jimmy Garoppolo scares me, but it's okay because he's scared of his own shadow. John, you get to tie a bow on the running backs. What do you got, man?
Yeah, so I think the guys have really nailed a lot of these folks. I think Todd Gurley's in a great spot this week, as he probably will be every week, so I don't know that I'm really going on a limb there, but I do like the way this game script sets up for him. Chip Kelly holds true to what he's done since he's been in the NFL. This should be a fairly fast-paced game from him and from his side, which should force the Rams to run more plays than they typically would. So I like Gurley, even though he's more expensive. I prefer him a bit more for GPPs because of that expense. I think that he will be lower owned because most people are going to try to get Spencer Ware into the lineups for good reason and spend up elsewhere. But I think Gurley's a nice high upside play. He's certainly got a decent floor as well. Outside of those guys, I think Lamar Miller is in a great spot, playing at home against a Chicago Bear defense, front 7 that last year I believe they were fourth from last in the league in terms of yards per carry. Led the league or pretty close to the league in touchdowns allowed on the ground. So I think that Lamar Miller will finally get to see him run more than a dozen carries here in Houston. Outside of those guys, if you want a deep flyer, maybe a guy like Latavius Murray in New Orleans. Everybody thinks that's going to be a big shootout. I think you could make an argument that they hand the ball to Latavius Murray against a New Orleans defense last year that gave up 12 rushing touchdowns and 4.9 yards per carry, which was the absolute worst in the NFL.
I'll say this. If they're going to go shootout, I want DeAndre Washington getting the ball. Because as we saw at Texas Tech, I mean, guy's a jitterbug, basically, not afraid to run inside, and a pretty good receiver out of the backfield. Let's go to wide receivers. Speaking of pass catchers, and John, you're snaking it. Let's go back around. Who you got at wide receiver?
Wide receiver this week, I think what we're going to see is a lot of people going very cheap at running back and then coming back and spending up at the wide receiver position. So Julio Jones probably tops that list. DeAndre Hopkins, again, going against a Chicago secondary that does not look stellar this year, to say the least. And, of course, Antonio Brown in Pittsburgh, playing in Pittsburgh without Martavis Bryant this year. Eli Rogers and Marcus Wheaton are the secondary receivers there. I think, is it possible for Antonio Brown to get 20 targets in this game? Maybe it is. I know he'll be going up against Josh Norman, but I don't think that's going to keep people away from him. So the folks are going to be spending up at this position, and those are the guys I think they'll be looking at. Wide receiver for you, Pasquino. Who do you like?
Yeah, I think it's smart to pay up this week, especially in cash games, because you want to lock in your points. And the most way the guys who get the ball a lot are going to get you the points, especially in half full PPR. You want those pass catchers with 10+ targets. So, top of the list: Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, Odell Beckham, Hopkins. I think you can. As far as I'm reaching down, is the Indianapolis, Detroit, and Oakland wide receiver sets. Those are the guys I'm looking at. You got your Coopers, you got your Hiltons, you got your Moncriefs, got your Golden Tates. Those guys in there, that's as far as I reach. Unless I'm looking for a flex spot and just trying to round up my roster with like a Sharp in Tennessee for just dirt cheap, or Kenny Stills. But for the most part, I'm going high end.
High end, Devin. What about Packers-Jaguars? And I know Jaguars, we talk about on-paper preseason narratives, like the Jaguars spend a lot of money on Malik Jackson, they get Fowler back, etc. Like, on paper, it seems like they should be better defensively, but it seems like maybe the same old Jaguars. And that's good for Allen Robinson, Allen Hurns, and obviously on the other side, it's good for Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, etc.
Yeah, it should be a pretty high-scoring game. So I think that's a game that's not really being talked about. So I think there's some upside there. I just have to throw one name in that is extremely cheap on some sites, and that's Marvin Jones. Detroit only has 4. I believe they only kept 4 receivers this season, and they're expected to throw the ball a lot. Jones steps in as the number 2 guy. He really should be seeing a lot of targets this week. I also like. We'll get to it in a minute, but I like the entire Detroit offense because they have such a limited amount of targets that they can throw the ball to. So Golden Tate and Marvin Jones are 2 guys that I'm definitely targeting this week.
Austin, you're wrapping up wide receivers. Who do you like this week and why?
I like a lot of the guys that were already mentioned. A couple other guys that I'm not investing in heavily, especially not in cash games, but I'm using to get a little more differentiation in GPPs are Jeremy Maclin and Doug Baldwin. They're kind of mid-range guys, and I think a lot of people are either going cheap with the Detroit Indy kind of guys, or they're going expensive. And I'm looking at some of these mid-range guys like Maclin, Baldwin, and maybe even Brandon Marshall for GPPs. Not that they're in these crazy, high-scoring games, Maclin and Marshall, but I think that they're going to dominate their team's targets so much that we should see some good production out of these guys.
Well, it's an interesting year at tight end, and DFS players are wondering which way do we go at that spot. If you're paying up at wide receiver, what are you doing at tight end? Austin, you're first.
If I'm going cheap, I know some people are on Jesse James in Pittsburgh, which I think is a good play for really cheap, $4,500 on FanDuel. But I like a little bit more Crockett Gilmore in Baltimore. If I'm going to add another $400 on top of that, I think that he owns that tight end spot in Baltimore, even though the depth chart seems like there's a lot of guys on the roster. I like him as a cheap tight end this week. Up towards the top, I'm investing in Jordan Reed and Delaney Walker as my 2 upper-tier tight ends.
Everybody loves Gronk, Devin, but maybe they shouldn't love Jimmy Garoppolo. We'll find out about that. Also, Gronk not at full strength with a hammy. What are you doing at tight end?
Yeah, the entire New England offense scares me with Jimmy Garoppolo. I think the price tells you that it's going to be the same as Tom Brady, and it's not simply possible. So I'm avoiding Gronk. There's 2 low-end guys. Instead, I'm not going low at quarterback, so I have to save money somewhere. 2 guys that I'm targeting are Vance McDonald and Eric Ebron. Eric Ebron is the guy who I mentioned in the last segment. Detroit doesn't have that many people to throw the ball to. Ebron is a guy who can get between the 20s, who can be a big focus in this offense. And there's high expectations coming off the first-round draft pick a few years ago. So I think he's the guy that I'll probably have the most exposure to. McDonald, I just like how Chip Kelly uses his tight ends. Blaine Gabbert is going to have some issues against the Rams defense, so he's going to have to look to the tight end and some short routes. He's a differentiation play compared to the Jesse James. Jesse James, who could be popular.
Well, and the thing with Vance McDonald, I always like to highlight, and Chip Kelly's playbook's on Google, so go examine it. It's interesting. The tight end's the first read on a Texas route like that on every single play. You do the belly option. It's inside zone read or inside option if the back is behind you. It's outside option if the back is next to you. You pull up the ball to pass. The tight end does a Texas route, very first read every single time. So you like what they did in Philadelphia with those tight ends. Vance McDonald could surprise. Pasquino, you watched that Chip Kelly offense. Hold it, don't throw up in your mouth. But your thoughts on tight ends this week?
Well, first I need to contradict what Austin said about Crockett Gilmore. Everything I'm hearing is that Dennis Pitta is probably the sneaky play that could be emerging back in Baltimore, kind of a throwback of sorts. And Joe Flacco, these guys are tight. I mean, Pitta used to be his roommate on the road. So if Pitta's active, I think he's going to cut into that Crockett Gilmore. I want to see one more week how that plays out. But if you want a sneaky play, then no one's going to be on. It's Dennis Pitta. As far as who I'm going to use a lot, I'm probably looking at Jesse James, like most people are talking about. But Delanie Walker is not getting as much press as he should be, and he's the number 1 option in Tennessee. Everybody thinks that they're going to do exotic smash mouth, run the ball game, but they are going to throw a couple times. And Minnesota was one of the worst teams against the tight end last year. So I like Delanie Walker. Spend up a little bit. You've got the salary cap to do it. You may as well spend up a little bit and get Delanie Walker, who's going to be probably getting 7 to 8 targets come Sunday.
If you get points for aches and pains, then Dennis Pitta is your guy, who is actually old enough to be Joe Flacco's father. John, you get to round out the positional analysis. Who do you like at tight end?
Yeah, the one guy I haven't heard yet that I'm surprised we haven't talked about is Jordan Reed. He's the number 1 guy there in Washington, and probably the best tight ends, maybe short of Gronkowski in 2016 or 15. He's a guy that you have to be considering. I know that he's expensive, but if you have the cash, he's the guy I'd be looking at. Dropping down from him, I went on record yesterday saying that I love Jesse James this week. He's 6'11", or I know he's 6'7", but the dude is huge. And this Pittsburgh team, when they get inside the red zone, they're going to be missing Martavis Bryant. So I think that Jesse James could fill that role. Although I thought he was a lot sneakier earlier in the week. It sounds like a lot of people are catching on to kind of that way of thinking. Outside of him, 2 guys that I think are decent plays. Clive Walford going against New Orleans, who allowed more touchdowns at the tight end position than any team in the league last year. And I also think that Dwayne Allen against the Lions could be sneaky. Because T.Y. Hilton will have his hands full with Darius Slay, and they get inside the red zone. Dwayne Allen's got that big frame for Andrew Luck to toss it up to.
Super quick, just because I don't want to talk about kickers, although we will. I promise that. Devin, to you real quick, as a talent evaluator, Jesse James never stood out to me. And yes, I'm a Steelers fan, but in that draft class, it wasn't a good draft class, but I'm thinking Max Williams, Clive Walford, from that year, those were 2 of my favorites. I always thought Blake Bell was an interesting developmental guy. And maybe it was Hackenberg, right? But I just never saw from Jesse James anything to think, here's someone to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, even as inaccurate as Hackenberg was, he still had a huge target, and James never stood out to me. Never really – he was always a red zone guy, but he was not a guy that you could really trust with yardage and in between the 20s. So I hope he does well. I'll have some shares of him, but I probably will be under-owned just because I'm probably biased.
Well, I want to see what Ben Roethlisberger does, and if he just calls him Heath, You know what I mean? Like, my name's Jesse. Shut up, Heath. Good route. Like, he misses him so much. Okay, kicker talk. Give me the green football guy if you're going to give me the green black-eyed Joe if you're going to talk kickers, because I personally don't want Austin. Okay, Austin, you're fooling me there. Okay, so Jeff, you get some kicker talk, man. Let's talk some kickers for DFS. What do you got, man?
Nobody likes to talk kickers, but FanDuel uses it, so you got to at least give it a little bit of attention. So if you're going to go cheap, the guy I know Devin was mentioning, he likes Matt Bryant down in Atlanta. I think it's okay. For me, I'm going to go Zerline for St. Louis. Excuse me, I did it. There we go, week 1. For LA against San Francisco, I think they're going to be up a lot of points. You got this guy's going to kick long. You can get extra points for distance. I think he's a good option. He's going to get. I think he's a good chance for 10+ points, and you got to roster one for FanDuel. So look for a guy who can get 10 points. Look for a team that's going to struggle in the red zone and have to kick field goals and long ones at that.
Every point matters, and yes, kickers are people, so we'll be talking kickers just a little bit on this show, but my favorite portion of the program will be stacks in our Football Guys Power Grid. As we wind things down, let's talk some stacks, some favorite stacks, maybe some stacks to avoid because they will be so popular. And John, let's go ahead and start with you. Who are some stacks you're looking for this week?
So I have a number of stacks that I like, but I'll throw one out that I think will be low owned. That goes back to the game strategy. When you're stacking, you're generally trying to win a GPP. A guy that really caught my attention in college and then this season in preseason is Will Fuller with the Texans. Providing he's 100% healthy, I love a Brock Osweiler, Will Fuller stack. Against Chicago. I'm not impressed at all with their secondary, and I think what talent they do have in Chicago will be focused on the other side of the field with DeAndre Hopkins. And Osweiler and Fuller showed a lot of cohesion, I guess, if you will, in the preseason, and Fuller's got breakaway speed. I think that it's a cheap stack that has a lot of upside and will be under-owned.
Yeah, Fuller's always reminded me of Ted Ginn. Even with the drops. Pasquino, stacks. That stacks that you love, stacks to avoid.
Well, we talked about the LA stack with the defense and Todd Gurley. I do like that one. The two, we mentioned Jacksonville and Indy. I think those are both stackable, so is Detroit. But I think some lesser-owned ones are going to be Oakland, as we talked with Derek Carr and his 2 wide receivers, Crabtree and Cooper. But Washington could be an interesting stack, and you could even triple stack it. Go with Kirk Cousins and, say, Deshaun and Jordan Reed. I think that's a pretty interesting stack. I love to pick a team to stack for a team that's going to struggle to run. They're going to have to get points. They're going to have to move the ball, especially against a team that's going to put up points. And Pittsburgh is shooting for 30+ every week. So I like the Washington stack a lot this week.
Jeff, give me some East Coast knowledge here. I did a Fantasy Sports Combine with Adam Schefter, and on stage we talked about Jamison Crowder, and he said that his people in Washington tell him the offense is going to run through 2 people, Jordan Reed and Jamison Crowder. Nobody on earth is talking about Jamison Crowder. Why?
Because they think Dotson is going to take over and be the guy.
Dotson's just coming back from the Achilles, man.
I know. That's what they're saying. They're not talking about slot receivers. Slot receivers, unless your name's Edelman, they don't talk slot receivers. I mean, Eli Rogers is getting overlooked too. I mean, slot receivers get overlooked. But if you've got an offense that needs to get the ball out quickly, slot receivers and tight ends are your targets. It's not the guys going deep. Deshaun needs time to get open deep. And if he can't get open deep, and Pierre Garçon is going to lumber down the sideline and not be open either, so you got to go underneath. So I like Crowder and I like Reed. I think those are 2 guys that are going to catch the ball quickly for Kirk Cousins.
Okay, Devin, stacks for week 1.
My favorite one is actually the Eagles defense and Ryan Matthews. Robert Griffin III just turns the ball over too much for me. I think that we could be giving the Eagles a prime short field for them to punch it in multiple times. So you can get points for the turnover and a point for the touchdown. Another one that I really like would be Matt Ryan and Leo Jones. Matt Ryan, everyone hates him after burning them last year. We expected to be a high hopeful season for the Falcons, and it didn't pan out. But I think that they could really succeed in week 1 against him.
All right, Austin, who are your stacks for week 1 that you're looking to?
I think, too, that we haven't mentioned in the stack section here is I like stacking Drew Brees with Mark Ingram. I know that running back quarterback is generally seen as a non-correlative play, but I believe that running back 1 and the QB 1 in a high-scoring game can have a nice correlation. So I'm looking to stack those two guys in some lineups. I'm also looking at that Detroit game that we were talking about before with Stafford and Marvin Jones. That's the pairing I like the best in that game.
Now, Austin, were you excited that this offseason, Mark Ingram, who did have that career high in catches, even said he was working more on his receiving ability? When I read that and I wrote about it on our Football Guys newswire, I was like, homeboy, you did all right. You did more than okay last year, but now Mark Ingram wants to be a better receiver.
Yeah, I think that we're going to find out pretty quickly whether or not last year was a fluke, and he's going to revert back to the pass catching he had the seasons before that. Maybe C.J. Spiller comes back into the mix, but I'm not seeing that. I think that Ingram's going to continue to get lots of receiving yards and receptions in this offense, and I'm not banking on Spiller to make a big comeback this year.
All right, is the Football Guys Power Grid, our Week 1 show here on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/footballguys.com. Also, you can listen to this show via the Audible. Subscribe on iTunes. Just look for the Audible and look for the Black Eyed Joe. Speaking of that, we're going to do a speed round now. Pasquino, this was your idea, so can you explain to our listening audience exactly what the hell you're thinking here?
Well, lots of people ask me that question lots of times. But the idea is that since we have so many people on our staff that are on the show and we have lots of questions, lots of answers, we want to take full advantage of the fact that we've got so many people to give an answer. So the idea is green if you agree and red if you don't. And then Cecil will call on whomever is probably the dissension and get an idea, or whoever he feels like calling on. Or maybe just wants to chuckle and says, hey, that green Black Eyed Joe kind of looks like you, John, so maybe I'll call on you. So we'll go with that. But that's the
Jeff,
idea.
I will advise you, Jeff, don't be the rebel, so you can always you're always the last guy, so that you can get called on. I know how you operate. We did punt plays last year. I know how you operate, Pasquino. Let's start our speed round. And again, just a show of Black Eyed Joes, and we'll call on one of you to discuss Dak Prescott over 14 points this week. Red. Okay, Devin, it's red. Why?
Yeah, I've mentioned the turnover problems in college, and I think that Dallas has a tendency to just run the ball, go very slow. We saw it when Roman was out last year. I think they could really take a lot of play clock this year to just kind of keep Eli and the Giants offense off the field. So I don't think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity. What opportunity they have will go to Elliott in the red zone. They're not going to risk Prescott running the ball inside the 20 because Jamil Showers, I believe, is their backup quarterback, and that would just be a total disaster if Prescott got hurt. So, they drafted Elliott as the top 5, number 4 overall pick for a reason. I think that if they do score in the red zone, it'll be Elliott.
Spencer Ware gets over 12 points this week. Green for everybody. Austin, why?
I think Jamal Charles, if he even plays in this game, is going to see very limited action. Sharkandrick West, I think I'd be more concerned about than Charles, but I still think that Ware is going to get the goal line work. He's been getting lots of reception work in practice. I think that this is his job to own, and I think he's going to keep it for the whole season. I think Charles, even when he's healthy, is going to see less work than Ware. Ware is a legit top 20 running back for the season, I think.
Yeah, Devin will back me up. LSU can never find a quarterback, but their running backs are pretty all right. Let's talk about a great SEC runner and Todd Gurley. You want that Monday night punch? How about the last Monday night game? And how about the best running back in football? Todd Gurley over 100 yards. Red, Devin. Why? Because I said he was better than Elliott. Because I said he was. I didn't say Ezekiel Elliott's a god walking among us.
It's mostly because I don't like Case Keenum. I think that Gurley could just go off and have a huge night. It's definitely possible. We've seen San Francisco have it before, but at the same time, Gurley only went over 100 yards in 5 games last year. So it's not like he is an absolute lock every single week. He go over 100 yards. He had several games where he was under 50 yards carry. So I think that the expectation is that he will come out and have 30 carries for 100 plus yards. It might not be a guarantee.
Well, let's talk wide receivers then. Antonio Brown will finish the week as the #1 scoring receiver over Odell Beckham Jr. and Julio Jones. Red, John, why?
I just don't love him this week. I think that he's always in play, especially in PPR leagues. But this week, Julio Jones is going up against a rookie, a highly touted rookie, but he'll be lining up against a rookie out of Florida. Odell Beckham, I've been hearing a lot of folks say about how poorly he played last year against Dallas, but they seem to have forgotten how well he played the year before against Dallas. And I just don't know. I don't think that Brown going up against Josh Norman is going to be higher scoring than both of those guys.
Next up in our speed round, T.Y. Hilton, highest scoring Colts receiver. Whoa. We got one green Pasquino.
I don't get that. I'd like to hear from some of the Reds, but I see T.Y. Hilton making the T.Y. symbol at least once, maybe twice on Sunday.
Listen, Moncrief's popular, season-long pickup. I even like Philip Dorsett. I've went as far as to say that there'll be 3,000-yard receivers in Indianapolis, Dorsett being the third. But, Red guys, pass it around. Why? Why is Hilton not going to be the #1 Colts receiver?
Take it, Austin.
Well, he's likely going to see mostly a Darius Slay on defense here, and I think that eliminates his ability to go off in this game. I think it also means that the Colts redirect their focus to Moncrief. He's the leading receiver this week.
Okay. Speed round continues with spending up on QB. We had a bit of that conversation before, but now you're on the spot. Are you spending up on QB? Yes, no. Both?
Wait.
John, you're confusing me. John, you put up both. That's confusing.
I know. I did that on purpose. So I think if you are in a cash game, you should not spend up. But if you're going into GPPs, you should spend up because I think it differentiates your roster and gives you players that you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to because a lot of people will be making their lineups with cheap quarterbacks this week.
Well, if you go up on certain positions, you're going to try to find cheaper options, but should you go cheap at both running back spots? Yes, no, yes. Okay, one no. That's Austin. Why?
I'm going to go cheap on one running back spot, and it's generally going to be Spencer Ware. But I feel like there's enough salary relief at all the other positions in week 1 because the salaries are released like a month in advance that I don't have to go cheap at 2 running backs. I'd rather pay up for 1 running back and feel a little bit more confident in his production and get a little bit more differentiation.
Jeff, why did you disagree?
I think it affords you the opportunity to go up elsewhere, and I think especially if Christine Michael winds up as being the starter, I think that you have to go with those 2 guys as your cheap ones. In a tournament, I could see it more just for differentiation, but for cash, if Ware and Michael are both starting, that's where I'm going.
And final speed round question, are cash games easier than GPPs this week? No, yes, okay, we're split. Send it around the horn. John, you're first. Why? Why is it no?
I think cash games, there will be a slew of overlap this week because we don't know enough information to make informed decisions about cash games. And so for that reason, I think the easier thing to win this week, comparatively speaking, that's comparative to a normal week, are GPPs.
Jeff?
I get what John's saying about the overlap, but I think that there's enough information out there, there's enough salary cap relief. You're not going to find more salary cap discrepancies in any week more than week 1 because, again, as Austin pointed out, the salaries are released so early. It does lead to some overlap, but if you have information like you're getting on this video here that Julio Jones should be your guy over Antonio Brown, maybe you are going to win most of your cash games. But for me, tournament plays, to figure out which tournament stack is going to be the one, you've heard 7 or 8 good tournament stacks, which one's going to pay off versus pretty much which running backs to use.
Devin, you're up.
Cash games are simple this week. Don't start Dak Prescott, you win.
That's what we call a mic drop. He doesn't even have a mic to drop. Just go like this, Devin. Boom. Just drop the mic. Austin, you're up.
I'm in the camp with John here. Week 1 is more difficult to win cash games in general. I feel like the more information we have about this season, the informed DFS player is going to find more success in cash games. So I divert more of my money to GPPs in week 1 and reduce what I would ordinarily spend in cash games to prepare for, say, like week 4 and 5, where I'll load up on cash games.
This has been the Football Guys Power Grid with Footballguys.com, our video DFS show that you'll see every week. And, of course, appreciate everyone for watching, for listening via the Audible. Make sure to check us out on youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. John Lee, why should our listeners check out Footballguys.com for all of their DFS content?
We've totally revamped this year's Cease. We've got over 40, almost 50 different features every single week. I know there are other competitor sites that are charging a month what we're charging for an entire year, and we have so many different tools that it's just way difficult to talk about everything, but the interactive value charts that we offer, made by Marl Tremblay to help build your lineups with all of our world-winning or award-winning projections built into those are worth the price of admission alone. But adding on articles written by all of our Football Guys staff, from top to bottom, it's a wonderful product, and it is practically giving it away at our current rate of $34.95 for the entire season.
Devin, if someone gave you a Dak Prescott jersey, would you wear it?
If he struggles this week, I would wear it. He can do great the rest of his career, but if he struggles this week, I will love Dak Prescott forever.
Okay, there, we're going to get that drop. Austin, final thoughts?
Hey, good luck with week 1 out there. Thanks for listening. We'll be back here every week, and we'll have a rotating guest spot as well, where we'll grow the Football Guys green-red voting system here. So thanks for listening to our premiere episode, and we hope to see you back next week.
It is the Power Grid and the brainchild of Jeff Pasquino. Final thoughts?
I can't wait for it to get going. I can't wait to see the games. And it's going to be my eyes.
Well, the show's already started, Jeff. What do you mean, get it going?
The games. The actual games we're actually following starting from Thursday all the way till late Monday night when our eyes will pop out of our head. Fortunately, Todd Gurley will probably give us an early bedtime where he gets 100 yards by halftime. But I can't wait to get it going. You know, all the content between reading all the content on our Football Guys, we have 5 articles over 5 montage articles that are all about the five main sites that we're covering, from Yahoo to Fantasy Draft to DraftKings to FanDuel, of course, and Fantasy Aces. All 5 of those get covered, plus all the IVCs that cover even more than that. So if you're not subscribing, if you're playing on those sites and not subscribing, you're doing yourself a disservice. It's going to more than pay for itself just in week 1 when you don't start Dak Prescott.
And that is a wrap for week 1 edition of the Footballguys.com Power Grid. I'm your host, Cecil Lamey, for the great John Lee, fantastic Jeff Pasquino, amazing Devin Knotts, fantastic Austin Lee as well. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. And as always, stay frosty.